thought of deepening in a kind of, adjective sense. That is, in a state of being of the e-portfolio, deepening our experiences in the classroom. And so I see it as a kind of, I guess if you will, a kairotic moment for opportunity, right, for both students and teachers, as well as what they can do in terms of writing and thinking processes, as well as, of course, assessment. So when we think about these relations, this combination, we certainly can't reduce these to variables, right? But ultimately, when we bring all of these things together in our classrooms, in our programs, across our universities, there are a number of opportunities, of course, that are afforded us, at various levels of student work and assessment. Deepened opportunities for the teacher. Okay, one, in terms of versatility and multimodality. In composition pedagogy or in any other course. Certainly as we are deepening ourselves into the 21st century, the idea of multimodal composing, multimodal design, in terms of project-based work, is the direction we're going, is the direction we need to be, and e-portfolios afford us that flexibility, that versatility in our classrooms. Not to mention that from them, we acquire developmental and or presentational artifacts. And we've discussed at length that e-portfolios can be one of two, or actually probably a hybrid of sorts, of two types. Developmental, that shows this kind of development of the student across a semester in a course. That would include drafts, planning, materials, for every piece that's included in it, and also presentational artifacts, where students are very keen on selecting, various items to include in it. I tend not to really consider developmental in the sense that students are including everything. There has to be some selective process where it's not a portfolio. Okay? So some people do interpret this as being just everything, in the bin, but there obviously has to be some kind of negotiation on the student's part. Platform intuitiveness and design, I guess that's what we're overwhelmed with at this point. But as you've begun to look at all of the various platforms, such as Digication or Taskroom, et cetera, you notice that there are a lot of opportunities embedded in those for us. Both assessment opportunities, information management opportunities, collaboration opportunities with students, creativity opportunities. And so I think when selecting an e-portfolio platform, we want to look for those that are intuitive, and that is they're meeting our needs, and nothing too greatly more. And of course, the design of them, particularly in terms of ease of use for students as well as faculty. Cost effective. I tend to see this as an advantage in the sense that once the initial investment or startup money, right, is invested in these various platforms, I think the returns on them, are cumulative. In that we can embed students' textbooks into the portfolio system, integrate, numerous other things that may have been separate before into one consolidated space. I think the opportunities there are very positive as well. Qualitative assessment. This is, I think, for me, the most important aspect of this entire prep grant. And that is general administration investing in this concept of e-portfolios as a potential assessment measure that is not your traditional quantitative, standardized, attempt to be objective, catch-all kind of assessment, right? This is something where numbers are certainly part of it, right? But it's also representational of a very formative kind of development in terms of student growth and progress that gives us a window into, right, the actual learning that's taking place. Because it does not discount, the students' reactions, their reflections, the various formative types of assignments, feedback that you have integrated into the e-portfolio, not to mention it as a whole is a representation of the student's identity, okay? Not simply a number without a name. For the student, I think these opportunities are even greater, right? Because again, we always talk about student-centered classrooms, right? And of course, we read Donald Brady's, all these folks who talk about the idea that the teacher, on stage displaces him or herself, right? And, well, I think e-portfolios facilitate that better than any other mechanism, because again, it creates that negotiation of knowledge and negotiation of meaning between an instructor and her student. First, it provides opportunity for collection, right? That is, students are not necessarily looking at singular assignments on a kind of production line, right? See you later, and move on to the next one. Rather, they're looking at their work in part, but then also imagining it synthesized into a whole. We'll talk just briefly more about that later. So that what they essentially accumulate is a subset of material. Selection, again, it exercises this notion of rhetorical awareness, which I'll also talk about later. The sense that students are able to put forth their best work, as opposed to, again, having assignments that they're not confident in, which they could have been more than capable if it were a different genre, et cetera, et cetera. So that they're able to negotiate their audience, their purpose, and their subject in selecting the materials. And again, I think the data that presents itself via the reflection, as far as the student's own reflections in the portfolio, not only does it exercise metacognitive ability, but again, it gives us very rare insight into how students are actually negotiating this process. Communication. And by that, I don't mean the communication of ideas. I think what's very interesting here is that it provides an opportunity for students to communicate their values. Whether they're doing it intentionally or even consciously, right? We're able to kind of catch a glimpse into what students value in terms of their writing, in terms of subject matter. I think those decisions can be very illustrative in terms of how students and what their value systems are. And synthesis and evaluation. And ultimately, they need to bring this thing together, so that it isn't all of these disparate parts, but rather it works as a kind of continuous whole of synthesized work. And of course, evaluation, right? Students ultimately are given the opportunity, very rarely in the classroom, to evaluate their own thinking, their own work, before putting it forward. And of course, in terms of Bloom's taxonomy, we're operating here, even at the first year level, in very higher order thinking categories. Of course, lots been said about the writing process. I like to view e-portfolios in terms of not just as a kind of almost a macro process, and the writing processes that are contained within that portfolio as the micro process. And we're all familiar, of course, with this traditional, very recursive model of composing. But what's interesting is that the e-portfolio mirrors and reinforces these writing processes, right, that our students bring to the classroom. And so it kind of creates this cycle of development and innovation that can be applied in other contexts. So it's one of the, I think, great takeaways of an e-portfolio in terms of deepening a student's educational experience, in that they're not only developing writing, right, they're developing these critical thinking capabilities, this ability to negotiate the work that they did, to put it toward a specific audience. And this kind of innovation, this kind of creativity, again, is something that they take with them then beyond, just as they do the physical e-portfolio. There's probably no more important, I think, concept associated with e-portfolios than rhetorical process. This is something, again, I think, whether you teach writing in biology or you teach writing in English, it's something that we're always very conscious of reminding our students about. And e-portfolios, again, the pieces within it are rhetorically oriented, but yet the whole e-portfolio itself is as well. And so students, again, as far as subject matter, it encourages imagination. It is not simply black and white on a screen. Rather, it's something that they can, again, using multimodal strategies, present their ideas in very innovative and creative ways. And I would probably, and it'd be rather interesting, I think, to research this, how students approach various topics, given the versatility of e-portfolios versus standard word processing applications. I think one would find that they pursue these topics much more in-depthly, much more in a much more sophisticated way, I would think. Purpose is interesting here, and again, if students are assembling and synthesizing various writing assignments, other types of projects, purpose is something that I think they get a heightened sense of with e-portfolios because of the necessity to connect these assignments, right, to their own personal goals. We talk a lot in activity theory about student learning and projects, assignments being geared toward, I don't know why they call it real life applications, because of course this life is real too, but this idea that, right, students can rehearse those types of writing, those types of thinking that they can actually take with them and apply to real life situations, such as writing newsletters for charities, right? Those sorts of things. And I think audience here too is heightened. It goes from, again, this idea of the one-to-one ratio, the student writing for the teacher. Here, I think, despite the fact that, like Walter Ong, right, fictionalized the audience, this is something that we always try to impress upon them, but I think with the e-portfolio, they have much more of a sense of it being one-to-many. The idea that this is something that they will carry with them beyond their tenure at the university into professional life, so that they're always conscious that that is representative of themselves, of their professional and academic identities. And so I think, again, as they choose, as they select, as they evaluate, they always have a sense of audience in mind in terms of this is how I'm presenting myself. Finally, e-portfolios offer plural definitions of assessment. Not just taking an e-portfolio and grading it, right? But there are many other levels of assessment embedded in e-portfolio pedagogy. This one, I think, is probably my favorite. We always go into writing classrooms with some obvious sense of what it is that we want to evaluate, what we want to assess. But there's no better negotiation of that than when you have students investing in that process themselves. And so I think e-portfolios offer a great opportunity to construct assignments organically with students. Ideally, you can't, I don't think, right, have students write particular assignments that you've given them and then expect them to connect the dots later. There has to be some kind of negotiation there in order for them to be able to synthesize those works later. I'm not saying that we start from scratch and sit down in groups with students and just generate assignments. Obviously, we bring them to the table and we have them adapt them in ways that they can actually use them. Students also can examine and evaluate their own writing. We've talked about this idea of reflection. And this, again, is an opportunity for students to invest, in the writing that they're doing. Teachers can also focus on formative assessment and delay summative assessment. How I've always presented portfolios in my classrooms is always with delayed summative assessment. That is, students get a sense of the portfolio as being something constructive, right? Something that's developing as they are evolving as writers, as learners in a particular classroom. And so very often, maybe, for example, if I'm teaching composition, I'll have students, they'll write maybe 5-6 essays by midterm. Some of those they won't finish, others that they've completed. They're given feedback. Generally, I use kind of screencast technology to give them feedback where they can watch a video of me walking them through their paper, but no grades. No grades. Interestingly, many students, really, and once they understand this concept, are not as, I don't want to say grade conscious, that many students aren't grade conscious, but I mean wanting that grade, so, they're disturbed by the fact there aren't grades, I guess, let me put it that way. And of course you always have students who want it, and you just, well, this is what I think it would be, and generally it's not to their satisfaction anyway, so they connect that concept, okay, well, obviously this is something that is worth going forward. And then so at midterm then, I generally will give them, an idea of where the portfolio is at that point, both in the individual pieces as well as the whole. And then they'll write maybe 5, 6 more essays the second half, as well as develop those they selected, and I'm sorry, they'll select 3 by midterm out of the 5 or 6. And during the second half of the course, they'll choose 3 more new ones out of those 5 and 6, but they'll also go back and revise the 3 for midterm. So they will essentially have 6 or 7 pieces that they've selected through the course of the semester to include, half of which were pieces they worked on the entire semester and the other half the second half. And again, with the reflective components and things embedded in. But the idea, again, is you're not producing this kind of production assembly line classroom, right, where the student gives you something, you mark it all up, you give them the grade. And of course, early in the semester, we know that their, I won't necessarily say capabilities, I'm very careful to say that, but their state of writing ability, regardless of what variables are impacting that, generally is disappointing to them. And so to receive these kinds of summative assessments very early on is very discouraging. And so when they take investment in the choices that they're making and the evaluation of their own writing formatively throughout a semester, they gain much more confidence, I think. And we, I think, obtain better results. Also, finally, portfolio is accurate representation of how the student has arrived. Again, it's this idea of a kind of progressive scale, if you will. A student who entered the classroom is certainly, or should be, if he or she is engaged in what they're doing, right, a better student in a sense at the end, particularly in writing. And I'm trying to be careful. This is all about composition, and I'm trying to be careful to make this interdisciplinary as I can. But the idea is that the work one submitted very early on ideally matures, right? And so it's kind of how you arrive. If you're a C writer at the beginning of the course and an A writer at the end of the course, then that's what you are. And I think e-portfolios facilitate that kind of thinking as opposed to the concern that C writing at the early is going to hurt me at the late. Finally, and sorry for it being kind of jammed down there, this is the unfortunate reality of many programs, and that is the need to generate data, right, for assessment. And certainly, as far as SACS and just general accountability, it makes a lot of sense. But the assessment data that one can generate from e-portfolios, and this ties back to the idea of choosing a good platform, right, in order to facilitate it, is that you can generate aggregate as well as disaggregate data. Aggregate data as far as an entire section of students, for example, but also you could disaggregate to the specific rubric dimension, whether it be, for example, audience. Across sections to individual students. So anyway, this is why I think we need very robust platforms that have a lot of data capabilities, so that we can really, the click of a mouse, have that information available to us. So e-portfolios, again, it's not just about a kind of summative grade, but rather multi-levels of assessment. So a few takeaways as far as e-portfolios. Again, it creates a number of opportunities, both for students and teachers. Also, innovative learning. It's learning in which students, again, can invest in. It's learning that we can be very creative with. Student ownership. Students, I think, that's their thing. They log in and it's theirs. And once I think students, again, take ownership of their learning, of their work, right, we tend to find much better results. Writing and professional development. It's not just about the assignments and the outcomes that they're meeting in the portfolio itself, but rather the employability skills that they're transferring, ideally, right, into other professional contexts. And of course, this notion of authentic assessment, as opposed to kind of standardized, one-shot deal kinds of assessments. This provides authentic artifacts that give us keen insights, not only to the work that they're doing, but also to the identities that they're creating. All right, so there's questions and discussion.
One of the things that has popped into my head as I've been reviewing some of these platforms and whatnot, I think it's part of the nature of the beast as faculty members, we talk and we research and we think problems out, and sometimes I think this gets made into a big, particularly with the platform, we make it sometimes, not we, I should say, make it harder than it sometimes has to be.
Oh, absolutely.
And one of my questions is, what would you say the biggest issue for choosing a platform is? Because as I'm looking at some of these, I think, what I want isn't that hard. I don't think
That's
any
right.
of this is hard to ask for, or is it hard for a company to put together these
Right.
days? So what would you say?
Yeah, there's a continuum. All right, so on one end, you have these extremely robust features in certain platforms that are more than what you need. That's the risk, that's the danger.
Okay.
Because ultimately, you want something that does what you want it to do, and not to have other things, obviously, obfuscating that, right? But then, kind of in the middle of that continuum, you have customizable platforms. That is, you can, in many of these cases, I know Digication's like this, and TestStream I'm not sure about, I'm thinking they are, if I remember correctly. You can tell them what you want. And they're able to remove various components from the portfolio platform that you don't need. And so ideally, then you are left with just what you do, and maybe some things that you might explore later. To me, I think that's the idea, is the flexibility. But then again, you have the very simplistic, attractive ones, like Google Sites. This is free, and again, I guess I am kind of giving my opinion. With a caveat, though, I think Google Sites is great, but I think we have to be careful, too, of the mechanisms it affords us as far as then data reporting. Our sister institution, Clemson University, integrated an e-portfolio platform across their university, and they use Google Sites. And it wasn't until after maybe a year or so of its initial launch that they realized, crap, we have no way of collecting any of the damn data from this. It doesn't offer that, right? And so they had to get with their computer science department. And their computer science department actually had to write a program that was able to then, fetch that data from Google Sites. And so you don't want way too much. Ideally thinking, this is incredible, right? Because you'll never use half of it, and you'll just obfuscate the purpose of it. And ideally, you want something that's customizable, so that it has what you need and maybe just a little more. And then finally, ideally, one needs to be conscious of a very simplistic, okay, this is really easy to use platform, but is it really going to offer me what I need?
And a few quick things to know about this. I actually requested, particularly from TaskStream, because they have a lot of options of what they can open up for you and everything. But with both Digication and TaskStream, I specifically asked them to open up the full array of everything from the student view perspective and the evaluator view perspective. So what you're seeing on those platforms to check out is the maximalist thing. So I mean, I understand it is somewhat overwhelming, but to be fair, to some extent, that's kind of my fault for saying, look, let's see everything you've got to offer and put that on the table. By the way, I'm so glad you mentioned Clemson. You won't hear me say that sentence too often, having worked at the University of South Carolina. But actually, I just came back from a meeting with the UNC Genet Council with the General Administration on Friday. And it was actually presented to the Board of Governors that one of the models for e-portfolio development is Clemson's model in several respects. Now, of course, one of the issues there is because this is becoming more prominent even for the Board of Governors, it raises these interesting issues about, you're exactly right, Clemson had to develop in-house, and granted, it is an engineering-based university. Hey, you're not still an IT, maybe you guys can do it. But I mean, see, but there are some very interesting, unforeseen consequences when you decide institution-wise you're going to cast your lot with this group, and so UNCC, their study primarily focuses on Mahara. And I think one of the interesting things we're going to find out from them is what happens when you have an institutional commitment to a platform. What does that mean? What kinds of consequences does that then generate that you're going to have to do. As far as the reporting and data gathering at UNCG, I don't know how many of you know about this, but it has been, apparently for a year now, a group, I don't know if they would call it a task force or whatever, but it's like this committee of administrators and faculty from throughout campus looking at how to institute a capstone type of experience more broadly throughout the university. Now, this is actually one of the strategic goals of the university. A big piece of that has started to emerge. They've brought me into that group because they've started saying, well, what do we do as far as assessing what goes on in a capstone? Because that's another way of thinking about capstones is for many universities it's assessment central, right? It's your last chance to catch what's going on with a student's education. And they said, well, maybe e-portfolios are a good tool for that. And so even though we, for our individual courses, might be somewhat less interested in some of these big assessment kinds of tools, from an institutional level, that could be very important. And one of the suggestions that's being made by this group already after its first year of work is to investigate the possibility of there being kind of this central person, I guess the capstone czar, where it's sort of like a focal assessment person who you feed the information about capstones to. So just bear in mind that that's something that we're going to need to consider. That's going to be in our big time evaluation rubric everybody's going to fill out as they officially choose their capstones the next 1 to 2 weeks. That's something to think of, and it's something we'll be reporting to GA. Speaking of reporting to GA, I'm also going to be distributing the questions that they are going to ask us all to answer on our meetings with GA next week. So basically what I will do is what any good PI does on a grant, which is collect all of your feedback and just copy and paste it and say, hey, this is what we think. So, Pat.
A couple things. First of all, as far as the applicability, I think that like Blackboard, there's many, many functions. I don't even know, and the students never see those functions. So I would hope it's something that we can turn on as administrators on and off as we need them. The second thing I'm concerned about, and I've even discussed this with Roy, there are several of us going to be in the same department using these e-portfolios. Now, let's say, for example, in 105, Jessica does, I don't know, Canvas. I choose digitization. Yeah. Well, by the time her students reach me, is there, are they going to have to learn a whole new system? Is there portability of what, I would hope there's portability of information. And then if it's proprietary to the UNCG, how can these students actually use this as they move forward in their professions? Those are concerns, those are big concerns I have.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, the latter part struck me. What information would be proprietary?
Well, like Blackboard, it's all password.
Oh, yeah, okay, I got you. I thought you meant their work, but, well, that again is a platform issue, right? And for example, education is something, once they have it for life. It's a portability of it. And this is what originally led Clemson to go with Google Sites, is the fact of its portability. And I think that's number one, because I don't think any e-portfolio is worth it unless the student can keep it. It's not a storehouse for us. But if we're going to achieve all of these things that I said I think you may achieve, right, it is something that then they have to take with them. And I think universities understand this and see it as a great opportunity, and this is, again, in Clemson's thinking that wasn't entirely student-centered, believe me, was that they can then track those students after they've graduated in terms of their accomplishments, what they've added to it, that sort of thing, which, universities love when it comes to annual reports. And so, that's a very important point. And so, again, I think portability for me is the the deal.
But what if I'm using one?
The different one. That's the first question.
And see that, because the student will see it as
that's problematic.
yes, and they won't take that information across it.
Maybe. Okay, that's the problem, definitely. And I think again, but again, how can you ask everyone to agree on the same one? We're having trouble enough, I think, choosing individually. But ideally, when a university commits to an e-portfolio, ideally they would use the same platform across. But for this, it's much more of a matter, this is exploratory, right?
Yeah, if this were a longer-term project, and this is something kind of idiosyncratic about the way that this research, the term of this research project is structured. Really, if this were a longitudinal study, I think GA would be much more interested in saying, let us track the experiences with a particular platform. And maybe each institution that's involved would have some instructors committing over a period of a year, which would be the minimum you would need, obviously, to understand what the issues are with this particular platform, and then the system will choose the best one. What seems to have happened is that that's kind of the way that this was conceived of at the outset, particularly by the Board of Governors, given they've got kind of a small reference point for this. And I think to some extent even GA kind of was thinking in those terms almost, and then they realized, well, wait a minute, if it's just a pilot project, what we're really interested in, and they emphasized this actually on Friday, what we're really interested in is what will it take, this is their exact phrasing, what will it take to bring e-portfolios as a pedagogy, less about the specific platform, as a pedagogy to scale, okay? What kind of support will it take for faculty? What will it mean about structuring the curriculum, about teaching experiences? We need to begin, at the very beginning, of a student's career. And of course, what Pat said, as far as portability and switching platforms, of course, unless a campus goes task stream from start to finish, every education major is going to have to change to task stream, okay? Because that is actually a DPI requirement for professional portfolios.
Well, I guess that was kind of the driving point behind my question as I think about this in the broader sense. If this is something that we want to look at and adopting across campus, I just imagine trying for our department, I mean, it would be a mess,
Yeah.
right? And so that's when I come back to, I feel like this shouldn't be hard when we take it to the broader, if it is taken to a broader discussion. We have tendencies to.
But let me ask you a question. Let's say they're taking a course from you, a course from you, and then a course from me, the same students.
Right.
They're gonna have to learn.
That's what I'm coming back to. Your real question is the very pragmatic one. Okay, I'm dealing with this in my class. Now someone else is going to be dealing with it in theirs, and the student as well, right? Unfortunately, what you imagine being a kind of learning curve where the student struggles to have to confront a new platform, the teacher again has to struggle, right, to introduce this new platform to the student, is a reality we can't escape. But in this project, that is, right? But I think the positive there, right, is that the thinking that goes into the creation of an e-portfolio is I would have to imagine the same across platforms. So the student already is carrying forward, ideally a body of work, but also an assembly of thought. The idea of selection, of choosing, of evaluation, of synthesizing. It just comes down to their adaptability to a different technology. And again, I'm very careful not to assume, and people say this all the time, they're the technology generation, which they are in a sense, but not in the right ways necessarily, right? And so I think a lot of groundwork gets covered, that first exposure to the e-portfolio, that first semester of the e-portfolio, that going forward, that assembly of thought is transferable. But it's just a matter of orienting them to the new technology, which, it might be a huge deal, it might not, but that's the inescapable reality. It's just that part,
I just have a quick question, slightly related, slightly not. Just because you've been doing this with your students, how receptive are the students to taking on all of these challenges? And
Yeah.
I say that because we've got the platform challenge working that, and then I'm kind of, for lack of a better word, playing around with it in one of my senior level classes this semester. And even they still don't really have the rhetorical sensitivity or discretion to actually figure out what to put in and what not to.
Yeah.
So for example, they're doing things like they upload their resume and they put their address on there, like, ooh, let's just not. it's not
Yeah.
super safe to do, you know?
Mhm.
And so I'm just wondering if it's how big the learning curve is for the students that you're working
Mhm.
with.
Yeah, big.
Start adding platform plus all these rhetorical decisions.
Right, big.
Plus add coursework.
Plus
Yeah.
course.
I mean, and with everything that we do in the class, we try to ground to what they're contributing.
Sure.
Right? And so they're sharing the same experience, generally with the same genres. Certainly, maybe not the same topics, right? But the same genres at least. And so, you know, we have sessions where, you know, I'm a firm believer that students, obviously, they should work on writing in class. You know, I hate the idea that you assign an essay and then they go write it and then they bring it back. So everything they write initiates in class, including their work with the portfolios. And so those students, of course, who have laptops, which the majority of them do, I think here everyone does, I'm not sure.
Know that initiative was discontinued.
Yeah. Well, anyway, you know, so all those kinds of questions and concerns are again negotiated between instructor and students. Now, this is not to say that this is like makes it easy, because it's not. Students have a lot of difficulty rhetorically with their writing anyway. And so what I was kind of talking about and what I've noticed, the e-portfolio kind of gives them a more direction, at least. You know, and one thing here's, before I forget, because I already forgot once and now I remembered it again, so I'm going to talk about it. It's something that, you know, you need to kind of common thread a space where students can be negotiating among each other. They're not sharing e-portfolios, but what I do is that we create a blog. You know, just e-blogger or whatever it is, Google's thing. And that becomes the source of much of their reflection, much of their own self-assessment. And they love that thing. I let them post whatever they want, so unfortunately you do get, I have to moderate these videos and things. But believe it or not, given that, you know, latitude, primarily what they are posting are their reflections on what they're thinking about picking for their e-portfolio. So what you find is this community who are negotiating those choices amongst each other. You know, what do you think about this? Or remember the essay you peer reviewed there? I was thinking about putting that in it. You see, that helps. That helps. But as far as, you know, audience, that one is always the killer. Because you can say it enhances audience, as I said, but two, their audience becomes more than you, but it may just become the other students, you see. And so those choices are all made within that kind of framework, unless you're more intentional, you know. And we talk about Walter Ong and fictionalizing the audience and so forth, but after 2 semesters of conversation, they're not going to be there anyway. You know what I mean? I see e-portfolio as a way to enhance that experience, you know. But the curve as far as the technology and things, yeah, there's a lot of walkthrough. And, you know, as far as the registration, that has to be so tight and right for them to do, because it ends there. If they can't, you know what I mean? You wait, for one, you have to wait about 3 weeks till they all finally register for the damn thing, right? And get on it. If that process is painful, you know, and I think we need to be conscious of the logistical kinds of, you know, how students access it, how students, you know, register for it, even how they log on to it, you know, that kind of upfront logistical experience, I find, it has to be streamlined. And if it is, then it's a really positive experience going forward, I think. If it's not, then you're always going to have folks who aren't doing it or actively engaged in it. At least in my experience, that's the case. But again, different strokes for different folks. I mean, every class is different, you know.
And then the commercially portfolio platforms, the way to figure out the interface of that registration issue is if they actually do have the full, I think in the industry it's called like a plugin, with the learning management system. Now, of course, if you're UNCG, you don't even know what your learning management system is going to be. But I did check with TaskStream and Education. TaskStream definitely has like full incorporation into Blackboard and Canvas. Digication has full incorporation of Blackboard and almost full incorporation in Canvas, and probably by the time we do it. And the reason this is important is what it does is it fixes the initial access issue for students, where once they log into their LMS, they're automatically logged into their e-portfolio platform, and all they have to do then is just go to that area like it's another area of the course. So it just makes that a little easier. But Pat, as far as the portability question goes, with any of these tools, they function very much like web construction tools. And that is, although all of your stuff is housed on the server, and this is the case for Google Sites and things like that, you can download all the contents. The issue here is, although you'll have all the stuff, basically it's going to be retained with, and depending on what platform you use, it's questionable exactly the form that will be, but usually what you're going to get is like HTML files. And so all of the stuff is there, all of your special formatting is not necessarily going to be there. So for example, if you've inserted images, the images will all be there, but the images won't be necessarily properly embedded for presentational forms. So you're still going to have to go through the act of reconstructing what it is. The good news is you're not going to have to search anywhere to get your materials. It's all there. You just got to reassemble it.
So ideally, it would be something that campus supports too, if we go that platform as a university, because
Right.
then that platform will connect with the.
Well, right.
Yes,
and
exactly.
actually, that doesn't seem to be an issue. And in fact, I checked I had a little conversation with Giannetti over in DCL, Continual Learning, they're more advanced than any of us in this stuff. And he said really a big factor in recommendation of an LMS is its interface with these other important tools. And he indicated that Canvas started emerging as one of the preferred tools because the third candidate in our LMS system choice, Desire to Learn, nobody seems to interface with it. So, but Canvas does seem, it seems to, as I said, it seems to play well with others. So that's not going to be a big issue regardless of which way we go. Pat, if you could take a minute and if you could maybe mention some of your experiences dealing with some of these issues in a WordPress environment, because although you haven't really called them e-portfolios, you've approached a lot of the things they're doing. And if you could just
Pretty
mention,
optional. It's not the whole course.
if you could mention to folks what you're doing with them, and in particular what you're confronting in that WordPress environment, that might be really helpful.
Sure. Well, they're only doing a piece of their work in WordPress. Many of them, my goal is to get them to learn something
Yeah.
other than just paper and pencil and their computer. But WordPress, they're using it. They do a media kit on themselves, and they have been putting on their resumes. They do a bio on themselves. They do some. They upload some of their work that they have done, whether it's posters or whether it's something, and it's been through working with you all. So we bring you all in to do it, and then we expect them to go to the. I'm sorry, you all. It's
I
not
got
Southern.
Some campuses is known as you all.
You all.
Y'all.
It's like an acronym.
Yes,
Yeah.
division y'all.
So, at any rate, and then they actually put this together and then present it to me, because they take that outside the university. And so it's nothing connected to Blackboard in any way, because that is so password protected.
Protected, right.
So they're doing that, and then they build on it. If they're doing it in their junior year, then I expect them to use some of it to keep it going.
Going, right. Yeah,
But their
that's
projects. Now, my question is too, if they do, because they do PR plans, and that would be my goal, is to get that piece on it
Right.
also, as well as but as far as their stories that they do for the DSBA stories, group work, can that all be put together on these portfolios?
Yes, that's very interesting. And these students, what level are they?
They're seniors.
Senior, yes, a senior. It would be interesting to think of conceive of the
Yes.
portfolio as at least an aspect of it as being just that, beginning in the first year. How many, even when they graduate, psychology majors aren't psychologists?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so ideally, that is an excellent idea, this idea of a media kit where you see a student has the ability to kind of evolve that thinking in terms of what he or she wants to do professionally and what that professional identity constitutes. What is it that psychologists do? What is it that they write about? And you can see that as being, I think, a great opportunity, even in terms of the choices they make in terms of internships and organizations that they join, where they're, revising that resume as they're progressing through their tenure at the university, right? Gearing it all towards what ultimately it is they hope to do. That's a powerful thing, I think.
I'm trying to also get them away from a physical portfolio, portfolio of their work. I desperately want them to get away from that because to me that's old school stuff. And if they're going to go into public relations, it is all electronic.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to move them.
And what do you? I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just commenting on the WordPress, because my only thing with WordPress is that the assessment and data piece.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, it'll give you the web analytics, but it's not going to give you the assessment and data piece. So in my head, I'm thinking they would have to, although that would be the final place where they would post like some of their work, we would have to have a separate place where we stored all that so that we could actually assess it according to the rubric. So, I mean, I like WordPress. I use WordPress myself, but that's the only piece that I'm trying to figure out if I used it. Because they can continue to use it afterwards, and if they want to build on it, and even if we go with another platform for the university or for the system, they can still take that out. Or if they had it saved in other places, like drafts or whatever, they can still take it out and put it into another system, and there won't be a fee. Or they might keep it in, by their own domain or something. It's just, I feel like WordPress is more, you have more options with it, but if you do education, then it's, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean.
It's just education.
It's just education,
Right.
yeah.
And that's an interesting point because, and Lindsay might be able to speak to this as our digital goddess.
You all.
As the director of the officially now renamed Division of Y'all. But, I mean, on the one hand, yes, we do have concern that, for us to realize all of the potential, or even some of the potential of e-portfolios as a learning instrument, a lot of this assumes that these technological issues, that the technology is kind of transparent, right? That you're like working through that. What we're all, I think, worried about to some degree is students get stuck in that technical end of things, and it's getting in the way of really helping them learn things such as strategic selection of materials and thoughtfulness about the way they present themselves in e-portfolios. So we're worried about the technical aspect. On the other hand, if we're going to say that one of the things that we're trying to have students learn, not just through e-portfolios, but through the process of their undergraduate education, is some degree of digital literacy, maybe there's something to be said in favor of, well, by golly, if you're on a job, you're not expected to go on this job and one system of doing everything. You have no capability of transferring to a new way of doing things.
Right. That's a good point too.
And the other thing I would say is the way that you'd be assessing e-portfolios is you really shouldn't be separating the content versus what it looks like. They should be able to know how to use the content in meaningful ways with the technology in order to fully display themselves. And in order to do that, you can't say it's content and it's technology. It's the ways they work together intertwined that will fully show in your
I think that what, from my WordPress experience, students are totally unaware that this is a way they can present themselves, and this is the way it's moving. And so when they do it, when I show them some examples from the previous semester, it's like, oh my God, people do this? This is what's expected when I go out. So they get on board, and so that's part of my reasoning for doing it. It's not just to, it's to collect information that says when someone wants to see your writing samples, you can say, I want to show you my whole e-portfolio. And employers are wowed by this.
Well,
Absolutely.
I like this idea too, though, that you can continue to add to it after you graduate, because people who are in the liberal arts, all of a sudden our sustainability is tied to, can we get these kids employed? And if they have this body that not only of work, that not only shows how we employ these, or they can be employed, they can also add to it. So it's something that is continuously tied to their work life, which is apparently the goal of education these days.
Sure.
I think that's an important component to have.
And both, and of course the two big commercial players that are solely dedicated to this, they're always TaskStream and Education, I mean, there are some other players that have the same models for this, but they approach it in different ways. Education, I think, as one of the perks to try to get more institutional clients, is that once you reach a certain threshold of adoptions, I think it's something like 200 with them.
Yes, I think that's what it was.
Then one of the perks they offer is unlimited alumni access. So it's sort of like, and I think, and again, I don't know all the details of that, but it's probably something like if a student has, at least X number of years, or if you have an institutional subscription, the students have access to that e-portfolio in perpetuity, okay? So it's unlimited alumni access is the way that they market that. TaskStream, it's not unlimited free alumni access, but again, it's a fairly typical model where they can scale the cost. So for instance, if they're an institutional client, they may let them ride a certain number of years with minimal to no cost, and then they would have to maintain it just as an individual account would. Exact cost figures are interesting because it varies depending on how you sign up for it, right? There are two models of costs on any e-portfolio paid platform. And this includes platforms that aren't solely dedicated to e-portfolios, such as some of the Pearson education tools, such as MyLab, which, and again, I might wind up just going with that to be a test case for it. One is you get an institutional client relationship with them, in which case you get an institution-wide license for X number of thousands of users per year, and that is a single institutional cost. Now, per student, that's the most economical way to do it, although what it does mean is some relatively substantial annual payments that the institution has to figure out some way of shouldering. And by relatively substantial, I mean we're talking about this costing out to something on the order of the lowest cost estimate we got, and these are all pretty much the same from one vendor to another, are about $10 a student per year. Okay. Now, when you think about that for either of our institutions, that's something on the order of about $180,000 plus per year forever. But there are various ways of thinking of alternatives to that. So you might say, okay, we'll buy X number of site licenses. And then the question is, does the institution shoulder the cost? Does the department shoulder the cost? Do we add it to student fees, like technology and stuff like that? And I think once the Board of Governors hears that one potential is to bump up student fees, they're going to start getting really concerned, because they're all about, and understandably so, because this is a charter of the university system, maximizing access to higher education. And every time you keep on bumping up those fees, there's a risk of shutting some more students out if those get too high. But again, those are the sorts of issues that we're just going to point out to the general administration. I think for us, what we're tasked with on the ground is figuring out how is the instructional and student experience for using these things. Is it getting us where we need?
Yeah, on a minimalist scale. And I think that's the best way, to conclude what we're worried about, right? Is this notion that, once you choose one, what you do with it is really minimal. I mean, if we're ever going to glean anything from how well these can be incorporated into our classrooms, then we need to do them in ways that are manageable.
So we could put just parts of our courses on it, or are you thinking the whole thing, the whole course?
Well, I think that's an instructional choice each of us has to make. If we want to structure the entire, I think it's a little easier in something like the writing courses to, the culture of the whole course. You can fairly easily say that the e-portfolio provides a scaffolding for that whole thing. In other cases, we may say that there is simply a component of the course that involves the e-portfolio. One of the things to think about is, remember, one of the pedagogical one of the central pedagogical uses of e-portfolios is to track development student work. So if it's a component of the course, we just need to make sure that we're enabling students to select materials that show that development through the course, right? Not just, okay, here's a snapshot.
Right.
So as long as we can do that, there are certainly a number of ways that can be structured.
Okay. I don't know. I think I would be And only because just some of the reading and like some of the research I've done and going to some of the conferences I've gone to about e-portfolios, I'd be hesitant about making it just a component, because it can affect buy-in, because students just see it as another assignment, but
Right,
not part of the course.
Yeah.
But so essentially, you want it to be the course, but you build your course around it, and they just see it as a part of the course, and it's not something extra or something
Yeah.
set to the side or another assignment that I have to complete. But just some of the things that I've heard from other campuses that have done e-portfolios, that seems to be one of the things that they have to have a conversation with faculty about making sure that it's not another assignment
Yeah.
or a component.
Yeah, and be careful, you know, you can still be a part of the course, but it's very, very dangerous to say, oh, and by the way, one of the other things you're gonna have to do in the course is an e-portfolio.
Is an e-portfolio.
So the more you make that, you know, something that's discrete and separable from everything in the course, I think the bigger problem you're gonna have getting students ready. All right.